Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American history, American presidents, and of course, I discuss international human rights law and everything in between. Today, I'm going to be discussing models of good citizenship. So, Americans, we developed our representative democracy, and of course we retained elements of participatory democracy. So Americans are very involved and engaged. I did an earlier video discussing what a participatory democracy is. Now, importantly, in a few days we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of our independence, right, on 4th of July 1770. Our independence was 4th of July 1776, and so we'll be 250 years old in just a few days, in just over 7 days, right, just over a week. Importantly, I did a video explaining what caused the independence. So initially, it was Massachusetts, right? It was Massachusetts that was the scapegoat. It was Massachusetts that was rabble rousing, that was sort of challenging the British. They challenged the Stamp Act, and then ultimately the British retaliated after the Boston Tea Party, the dumping of the tea of the British East India Company in the Boston Harbor, right? And the British then imposed the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts. It's called the Coercive Acts or the Intolerable Acts imposed by the British Parliament. And of course, eventually, this was intended to isolate and destroy the economy of Massachusetts. Massachusetts governance was stripped. They were stripped of their charter. So you see, Thomas Jefferson is mentioning this in the Declaration of Independence, where he's stating the grievances against the British Crown, blow by blow, point by point, line by line. Now, importantly, you see a feature of our democracy, right? It was only Massachusetts that was being targeted initially, but the other states, there were colonies. The other colonies then got involved. That's Virginia, South Carolina. These colonies weren't affected, right? There wasn't anything going on. They weren't being punished by the British government, by the British Parliament or the Crown. So they they came to realize that, well, if the British Parliament could punish Massachusetts, humiliate them, strangulate the economy, simply for protesting no taxation without representation, then they could do it to the other colonies as well. They could also strip them of their charters if they, at any time, if they want to protest, if they want to air their grievances to the crown, at some point. So you see, that's an element of good citizenship, right? So you see, our right to protest, that's our First Amendment in our Constitution, which we still have to this day, right? The 1787 Constitution. Then, the Bill of Rights came, after 1789, around 1791, because they had to be ratified by the states in order to become, the part of the Constitution. So the First Amendment, our right to peaceably assemble and to protest and to seek a redress or petition the government for a redress of our grievances. So that's part of being a good citizen, right? That's part of being a good citizen. And you see, over time, Americans have done it. Now, I did a video saying Nigerians didn't demonstrate good citizenship. They made bad citizens. Being successful economic migrants and being a good cog in the capitalist machinery, right? That doesn't equate to being a good citizen that moves the needle of our democracy forward, that checks the tyranny of the majority, of the majority government, right? It, those are two distinct things, right? And I'm gonna do another video and focus on that, discussing how Nigerians do not make good citizens in America. Despite the fact that, yes, they're very resourceful, they're very capitalist, they are well educated, they are highly educated, they work hard. All of those things people who have H1Bs do, F1 students do. The best job I've ever had, the time I worked the hardest was when I wasn't a citizen, right? I had excellent jobs, and I already had the most educated group of people in America, right? Are not American citizens. They're the category of people who are F1 on F1 visas, or H1B status, or work permit status, or just green card holders. None of them are citizens. None of them can vote. By the time Nigerians become naturalized citizens, right, many times they don't even, many still don't vote. They don't change that mentality, that mindset of what they were doing as H1B visa holders or F1 students, or, you know, green card holders. They don't change it, right? Many don't vote because we're still focused on accumulating money. So accumulating money or status, or, you know, that doesn't translate. It's not the equivalent of being a good citizen, right? A model citizen that advances our democracy, that creates those just laws. It's not the same thing, because Nigerians are typically focused on remitting funds back home, right? They're building a mansion back in Nigeria. They're supporting lots of family, an entire village, right, with their money that they're earning in America, right? They say Nigerians remit about $40 billion annually, right? Nigerians in diaspora remit about $40 billion annually back home to Nigeria. They're focused on doing that, so they, you know, that's diminishing, it's mitigating the ability to put that money in America. If they were investing that money in America, hey, look, Black Americans, they don't see any other place as their country. They don't send funds anywhere. They spend all their funds here in America. Black Americans, the Asian Americans that are here, you know. So I'm going to give models of good citizenship, and I will do another video and expressly state how Nigerians are not demonstrating these examples of good citizenship. So let me talk about even Asian Americans, right? During the Second World War, I've done a video, I've talked about Korematsu, right? How Korematsu and other young men challenged the constitutionality of Japanese being interned in concentration camps, right? That it violated their constitutional rights, right? It violated their Fifth Amendment rights, right? And the bad laws that were passed were eventually overturned, and Japanese were paid reparations later on. And so Korematsu, you know, so you see, good citizens are willing to engage and challenge the government on bad laws, saying, well, they're doing something unconstitutional, right? Because America is still is that shining city on a hill. We're a model of democracy, right? That's what we practice in America. We're checking the tyranny of majority rule. Now, another form of model citizenship is, consider the boycotts, right? The Montgomery County bus boycotts that was executed by Black Americans during the civil rights movement, right? Segregation was the law in the South. Segregation was the law in the South, but eventually, I think, eventually through mobilization, peaceful mass protest, the boycotts, socially, Black Americans, right, they were able to change a bad law, the bad conditions of Jim Crow and segregation in the South. They were able to challenge it. There was actually is it Browder? There was a case that simultaneously was taken to the courts, because the U.S. Supreme Court, I think it was November 1956, would rule that segregation in mass transit was unconstitutional. But before that, Black Americans, led by a young Baptist minister, pastor, right, a new in town Baptist pastor. That's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That was his job. His job was not as a, as an activist. He was a pastor. But something terrible happened. Rosa Parks, right, was arrested for refusing to go to sit on the bus or on the back in the back of the bus, in compliance with the segregation rules, in Alabama at that time. She was protesting it. She was protesting that, okay, this is a bad law. It violates her 14th Amendment. So she was arrested. This was December the 1st, 1955, thereabouts. She was arrested. After she was arrested, other groups protested. Women formed groups, councils, right, to distribute flyers saying, well, we Black Americans, we're all going to boycott the mass transit systems and organize new forms of transportation in order to change this law, because she was humiliated, because Rosa Parks was an upstanding person. She was a seamstress, but she was humiliated and arrested for protesting, saying she couldn't sit in the back of the bus, even though, it was a bad law. Eventually, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, they elected Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He was very young. I think he was 28 or so. He was in his 20s. They elected him as president. And then they organized alternative means of transportation to sustain the boycott. It was initially a one-day boycott. It was women that organized in support of Rosa Parks because she was humiliated. And, Black people had their own dignity. Yes, she was working as a seamstress. She didn't have money, but she was humiliated. So women organized in protest in her support. Then the other people then participated, right, to sustain that boycott. So what started as a one-day boycott in protest led to a 381-day boycott of the segregated busing system in Montgomery, Alabama. 381 days. Eventually, the Supreme Court in November then ruled. Meanwhile, civil rights attorneys were now filing lawsuits as well against the laws. And eventually, around December 20, 1956, the boycott came to an end when after the Supreme Court had ruled that, okay, the segregation of these buses, was unconstitutional. It violated the 14th Amendment. So you see, that's a model of good citizenship, right? Another model example of good citizenship, so you see these peaceful protests in consonance with the First Amendment, right? You see grassroots organizing. Remember, the 10th Amendment says that the power is not delegated expressly to the federal government, right, under the United States Constitution, nor expressly prohibited to the states, right, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So protesting, and of course the First Amendment gives Americans the right to assemble, to organize, to assemble, and to peaceably protest for a redress of their grievances. And you can see this is what happened in the Montgomery County boycott. Do you think the segregationists, the racists in the South, just immediately gave in? No. They retaliated by arresting Black Americans who participated in the boycotts, peaceful boycotts. They terminated them from their jobs. They fired them. They would arrest people who were, walking and everything. They'd lock them up. They humiliated them, but they sustained that. They organized together and they sustained the mass boycott, right, for 381 days. So that's an example of citizenships, a good model citizenship, right? It's not just you going to work and earning money or getting all the degrees, or that's what people in F1 status do. That's what people who have H1B status, green card holders, people who are not citizens, they do that, right? They're just examples of economic migrants. That's all they are. They're economic refugees. That's not an example of model citizenship that makes supports a government of we the people, that supports rights, that changes laws, that are just, right, for everybody, for we the people in America, right? So another example of model citizenship you see in the Occupy Wall Street that happened. It started on September 17, 2011, right, in the financial district in New York, after the government bailed out the corporate giants and the banks after their atrocities in that led to the 2008 financial crisis, right? So people went and sat down in Wall Street and everything. Uh, they didn't achieve any legislative goals, ends, or anything like that, but at least they drew attention to corporate corruption and the inequality, the wealth gap in America. So you can see the wealth gap has become a concern, in the national conversation, in America, right? So the wealth gap those discussions have been there. And Nigerians, anyway, as I said, I'm going to do another video, but let me just give an example. I'm going to do another video discussing expressly how Nigerians are not examples of good citizenship, right? In in creating a more just society, right? Through our democracy. For those who championed, right? Those who championed democracy in America, people like Dr. Martin Luther King, that I said, he had a PhD. It wasn't an honorary doctorate, and his job was as a pastor. He was a Baptist minister, right? But he started to participate in these peaceful mass protests and demonstrations in order to change laws in America, right? To change minds and affect laws, create more just laws in America. He went to jail for over at least 29 times. He was arrested and locked up at least 29 times. We know he was assassinated at the age of 38, right? But these are sacrifices that Black Americans have been able to make. The other communities that make these sacrifices, again, I talked about the Japanese internees, the young Japanese. There was another person. Was Bayashi? I can't pronounce his name. He was a college graduate. Some of them were college graduates, and they lost their freedom. They were jailed for challenging the constitutionality of the laws that said that targeted Japanese Americans and put them in concentration camps and stripped them of their possessions, right? They were young people. They were ostracized from the larger Japanese community. So it happens. But in any event, Dr. Martin Luther King was locked up 29 times, right? For his peaceful demonstrations to change the laws, right? To bring about just laws in America, inequality. John Lewis, another, he was a loyal associate of and a major feature of the civil rights movement. Later on, he became a famous congressman. John Lewis was arrested over 40 times, I think around 45 times, over 40 times. He went to jail over 40 times for his peaceful protests and demonstrations, civil rights demonstrations. Importantly, he was born in Troy, and he was prevented from going to a university, Troy University. It was called Troy State at the time. I went to Troy University. I graduated from that school. Now, that school has now honored him by changing the name of its business school, where I went to, right? It was initially called it was named after a Klan member, a former governor of Alabama who had been a Klan member, Bibb Graves, right? It was called Bibb Graves when I was in Troy, Alabama, when I went to Troy University. But now that Bibb Graves building, the business school, Sorrel College of Business, the business building is now called John Lewis Hall, named after the civil rights icon, who was a model of proper citizenship, right, in America. So it's now called the John Lewis Hall. He went to, again, he was arrested, went to jail over 40 times, right? Not for selling drugs, not for doing something criminal. If for us in Nigeria, I guess back home they think anytime you go to jail that it's for doing something that it means you're a criminal. No, America recognizes people who are they're protesting, they're going to jail based on principle, right? For instance, I was actually locked up because I refused. I said, me being asked to do a mental health evaluation was a violation of my constitutional rights, and Montgomery County Police raided me without an arrest warrant. And so I've done videos expressing what happened to me. Now, an example of why Nigerians are not good, they're not good citizens is because all of them, despite it's been over 3 years. I'm a model citizen. I hold a top secret TSSCI clearance. I was working in the United States government in the most secure area, classified area. Meanwhile, I was raided by 40 cops on false accusations when a Nigerian man, a Nigerian professor, Howard University professor, GDY, we don't know if he's senile or he has dementia, but he lied to police and he immediately recanted. He lied to them that I threatened to shoot him, which things that never happened. So the police just raided me, filed false charges. Even if somebody wanted to arrest me, there's a procedure, there's due process, right, of doing that. I'm supposed to be given notice, given opportunity to dispute it. None of that happened. Meanwhile, I was removed from my home, raided. They spread disinformation against me, and I was removed naked in handcuffs and dumped in the middle of a hospital. My family didn't know where I was. I'd basically been kidnapped in my home on false accusations, and the police recorded me naked, right? Outrageous. That's more outrageous than Rosa Parks going to jail for a few hours for refusing to sit in the back. So you see, Nigerians, they haven't done anything, in America, because they're focused on, they wanted you to leave them out of it. So obviously, of course, they're not good citizens in America. They don't know what it takes to be a good citizen in America. But in any event, I've tried to show what a model citizen is like, and how Americans engaged in grassroots organizing, and an American citizen's right to protest, right, it is not being a bad citizen. It is actually an example of being a model citizen and advocating on principle, right? My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.